Okay, the Polar Duo is back with a map on trauma. Here's Pip, an expert in traumatic release. He goes boxing and barking, and he has a tiny little dog. He's usually the smallest one around, and his traumatic mode is fight. Sometimes he'll get small and freeze, and sometimes he'll run away, but normally he barks, particularly after the danger is over. And as soon as the issue is past, whatever it is, sometimes it's me as an overwhelming force, dancing with him. And so he might go into a frozen motion, but as soon as he's down on the floor, he shakes it all off, resets, and is back to square one. And it's what we would do if we didn't have social convention. So I wanted to make this map because it's a map that I've discovered over the last 3 years of coping with overwhelming trauma and PTSD. And it's a map that nobody has ever spelled out for me. So, it seems possible that, well, obviously for me, I've been to the Findhorn community in Scotland, the Esalen, community in Southern California, taken more than 100 workshops on, various aspects of psychology, spent time with, the different channeled entities, including Lazarus, read The Body Keeps the Score very recently, and that's what's kind of got me focused on this traumatic map, and done more than $150,000 in various one-on-one therapies. And no one ever sat down and asked the questions that I'm going to be asking you as a way of developing a sense of where you may be in trauma. Now, I want to summarize the phenomena of trauma and what induces it. It's a reality or a perceived reality, and it's very hard to tell the difference between the two. It may look one way on the outside, but the truth is that because our neurological patterned responses are so much a part of survival, just because you look at someone and say, you're crazy, your life is not in danger, does not mean it's not in danger. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say you have a contract with an abuser, which is one of the things we'll touch on lightly here, that says that you have to agree that they're right because the projected abuser in a regressed age, meaning you made the contract when you're 2-year-old with your dad, now you're dealing with a father figure, you're emotionally 2 years old, you're back in the contract, and the current adult around you wants you to do X, Y, and Z. But they don't understand that X, Y, and Z would kill you. They don't understand it. Now, they're not taking responsibility to learn about who you are, to even understand that there might be a contract going on. They probably sense it. And most people, if they're not conscious, will use these unconscious contracts to their advantage. So someone just notices that you seem to get small around them and do what they say. And so they need something done. They look around and, okay, that person, I'll pick the one who does what I say. Okay, go and do this. Well, there are varieties of circumstances in which going and doing that is the worst possible thing you could be doing. And if you've got a contract with the abuser, with the projected father figure, for example, and you're in that trigger point where you're emotionally 2 years old, there's a good chance that if the contract says, I will do what father says and he won't kill me, there's a good chance you're going to go and do that on an instinctual level with the feeling that if you don't, you're going to die. Now, it may just register as mild anxiety because you immediately go and do it so that you don't face the full onset of that terror. But it's possible when we're flying blind to ask people to do little things that unravel their lives. Now, this is intended as a beginning in trauma literacy, in emotional literacy, and psychological literacy. Frankly, the single most important and significant landmark for our species' future. We do not lack resources on the planet. We do not lack food, energy. We do not lack resources on this planet. We lack sophisticated software that ensures a steady growth in personal well-being for everyone on the planet. Now, that software exists. It is an ideal, and it's something we make incremental progress to. So let's dive in. So, can you be the person you want to be regardless of who's around you? So one of the ways that you can tell if you're dealing with, because what we have here, and I'm just going to draw this line, is we have the relationship that is above the conscious line. Here's the line. We have the unconscious down here. Now, just because we put, for example, the Titanic did not see the iceberg that was beneath the waterline, it doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean that just because a tip of an object penetrates the conscious mind, that there isn't a mountainous terrain beneath the conscious mind, beneath the level you're aware of, that has enormous gravitational pull on your behavior. You just don't know what it is. So what we're trying to do here in mapping out trauma, because trauma is one of the points where you dissociate, and to kind of finish that little thought, when you flood, let's watch this. You're watching a hand. It's coming forward. It's coming forward. Now you can still, because you're not engrossed in the phone, you're not the phone. But imagine that you are this phone. I'm recording this on a Note 8, so imagine that you're in this phone, and so the only reality that is real for you is everything that this phone can see. Now, as this hand gets closer and closer and closer and closer, it eventually reaches a point of flooding, where the only thing that exists is this hand. Now, once you reach this point where the hand is to the right and the left, well, we've got to zoom back out. Okay. Once you reach that point, and that's another way to do it, you can zoom in. This is what happens with obsession. You zoom in, and this, your entire reality gets frozen in this one place. Once you reach this point, you lose all perspective. Perspective is contrast that allows you to place things in scale. You lose perspective on time. You lose perspective on and as soon as you lose the concept of time, as soon as you're in a flooded state that seems eternal, you flip. A switch goes off in the brain, and it's fight, flight, or freeze time, because you are locked in a horror, in a threat of some kind that seems eternal. It's outside the framework of time because you're so zoomed in on it that no matter whether you look here or here, here or here, all you see is the object in question, the traumatic object. Now, a lot of these objects occur unconsciously because we put them there. And so, can you be the person you want to be regardless of who is around? Well, rationally, you're going home to Thanksgiving. You say, okay, Michael and Sherilyn. That was one of the tools I used as a teenager to help differentiate myself from these flooding areas with my family. I would have these immense emotional reactions that could consume me, that could just zoom in and fill in, the entire nature of reality. So I would dissociate and distance mentally. I can't do that physiologically, but I can do it mentally. So I'd say, okay, these are two people called Michael and Sherilyn. And let's look at them objectively compared to 10,000 other people I've run into in life and say, okay, are they more dishonest than the average American? They seem about average. It's a country and culture rife with dishonesty. Are they more cruel? In some areas, yes. In other areas, no. It has to be segmented. Incredible cruelty here, none whatsoever over here. This cruelty compounds with this cruelty, and this cruelty to have unbelievable amounts of pain. But, what would it be like to be some other kid in some other, environment? And so I would look at them and I'd say, well, if I met them on the street, would I feel this amount of animosity? If I was meeting them for the first time, it's like, my mother's a bit of a ditz. I probably have, an uneasy relationship with Michael. But, worse than everyone else? No. And so you use this mental tool and you get a sense of the gravitational impact that these two individuals, called Michael and Sherilyn, should be having. And then, you go back to Thanksgiving or something like that, and then suddenly it's like, the persona that you've cultivated for the last 5 years just gets ripped off, and suddenly you're 4 years old. It's like, okay, so I can be the person I want to be here. I can be the person I want to be here. I can be the person I want to be on my own. But there's something going on beneath the surface in the biology and in the psychology. And of course, they overlap. They overlap. You can stimulate laughter by sending electricity to certain brain functions. You can stimulate depression. You can stimulate trauma. There's all kinds of things that overlap between biology and psychology. Now, materialistic scientists would say there's a complete and utter overlap, but that's a little bit weak because they don't even have a theory that understands consciousness. Secondly, there have been situations where 98% of the brain has been dead and drowned in water. And they'll do a scan, and it's like, that brain is 98% dead and filled with water. And they've got memories. And we can't even find memories in the brain, and so we can't take materialistic scientists seriously when they don't even have a working theory for memory and consciousness. But there is definitely a correlation, and it's difficult to pinpoint, because obviously the correlation that works for the person whose brain is not underwater and 98% dead is different, because if you touch that part of the brain, it's dead. So where is their locum, or kind of contact point within the physiology for all these conscious experiences? We don't know. Materialists don't like that, but an honest person says we honestly don't know. So your guess, if it's an informed, reading with the data, etc., that we have, is as good as anyone else's. But if you can't be the person you want to be, and that makes sense to you, like that I want to be this way because it makes sense to be this way, but I just get near her and I get sucked into a black hole, we're dealing with a traumatic object. Because trauma leads to these things called contracts, where Because as an infant, we're watching the facial expressions of the people around us. And we learn what is and isn't okay. You know, if they become terrified and leave you for an hour to cry when you start doing this, but they smile and are nice to you when you do that, well, you learn it's not okay to go into this part of your own psyche because it terrifies the parent, the mother, the father, etc. And Philip obviously is not in trauma right now. He is greatly enjoying himself on my lap here. So this is a clue here. If you cannot be the person you want to be, regardless of the people you are around, you are in a domain that is correlated with trauma. So you've got traumatic work to do, and a good place to start. Peter Levine's Healing Trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. Now, tying in with this, do you feel present and free in all parts of your body? So there's a zone right here where I can get into that cough. Now, if I keep looking there, what is it? I can find my way back into a memory, something that's being touched there. It's called body mapping. So your body is a map. Now, in a healthy and balanced state, you can go anywhere in this map and look at it with zoom in lens and zoom out lens. In a coping mechanism, and all coping mechanisms are correlated to trauma, meaning if you are doing an involuntary action, an involuntary thought, an obsessive behavior, you know, you go into this altered state around porn addiction, whatever it is, an obsessive behavior, an involuntary thought, oh my God, I'm going to be punished, I'm going to be punished, whatever it is, you are in a coping mechanism. You're locked down. So you're navigating through this language, you know, this vocabulary, this terrain, this map within the body. And what happens is when you've got unresolved trauma, is there are certain pockets within the psyche that you haven't dealt with. Now, it's no wonder you haven't dealt with it in a trauma-illiterate, sociopathic, emotionally illiterate culture. That's a given. Unless you break with the cult of culture, you haven't dealt with some pockets of your trauma. Now, the pattern of moving through the body is typically spiral. It's an organic flow. You know, memories correlate to senses. For example, a smell can bring back a memory. But let's say the memory that's being protected is in a coping mechanism. A coping mechanism is an unconscious design within the physiology and the psychology of the individual to make sure they do not consciously open themselves up to the traumatic moment so that they don't get flooded and rendered helpless and unable to move, basically. So, you know, a scent comes in to your brain that starts taking you to that memory. But it's a traumatic memory. That the point at which you dissociated from that memory, let's say it's 2 years old. For example, one of my first memories is being chased by the family dog in tall grasses. I could never outrun the dog. I was terrified of the dog that was bigger than me and had unregulated energy that was very clear that dog could kill me. It was very clear that dog had no sense of what I needed and what my boundaries were. So every time I took off away from that dog, it was just a matter of, time before that dog took me down in tall grass. And I lay there helpless, unable to respond fast enough as a 2-year-old infant. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that that's the pinnacle of helplessness. That's when I felt completely and utterly helpless, no boundaries, smothered and overwhelmed. And this dog would be licking me and pulling it. And like most dissociated parents, oh, no big deal. The dog's not going to kill the child, It doesn't matter what the parents think. It doesn't matter what the dog thinks. It doesn't matter what the dog will do. What matters is how a 2-year-old feels. Okay, so it's grass pollen period as this is happening, and I'm laying down in the tall grass that I can't run through. I can't escape. The grass is as tall as my head. Now, that timeless horror, that timeless helplessness has been partitioned away because you can't function. If that amount of helplessness and terror hits you when you're driving down the highway, etc., and you don't know how to deal with it, you're dead. You can't freeze for 6 seconds. So you develop a coping mechanism. The coping mechanism is you block the whole system. So the grass comes in, and rather than bringing back memories of helplessness and terror, I get an allergic reaction to the grass. I start sneezing and, get that grass away from me. And then this in turn creates a myopia of focus when you're sneezing and you're very self-absorbed and stuff, and you're not open to feel what's going through your body. And so you can observe a coping mechanism by when you get fixated into a certain part of your body, a certain part of your psyche, and you just kind of go into lockdown mode. Now, many people do this around dates. A relationship isn't quite working out. They don't want to go on a second date, and they'll freeze in this lockdown mode. They'll run away from the other person. They won't return the call. They won't respond. And then if they're absolutely confronted at a party or something, they'll say, well, oh, how nice to see you. I had no idea. And they'll just lie through their teeth because there's something going on that triggered them. Now, the person who's inviting them on the date is the equivalent of the pollen in the grass. There's nothing wrong with pollen. What's truly dysfunctional in this case is the idea that you can have a healthy functioning society that is emotionally illiterate, which is, of course, a joke, which then leads to the behavior to send kids through school learning absolutely everything except the things they most need to navigate their daily lives, which is a rich tapestry of rapport with their body, with the full range of the psyche, with their own thoughts and feelings, with the biology of trauma. I mean, it's kind of like, could we just put blindfolds on every one of our citizens and then send them around to bump into the world and have no idea what's going on? So that's the flawed idea. But once we're in that state, all kinds of different things become the enemy. Not because they're the enemy innately, but in this case, the smell of of pollen and crushed grass can take the consciousness through the body's memory biology all the way back to the moment where this flooded moment can't be dealt with because there isn't the technology within the culture. In a trauma-illiterate culture, you start spasming and going into this, and you have people doing the exact thing to make it worse, and no one has a clue what's going on. So it's not safe to go into it. And this is a cultural crisis. There's nothing wrong with the body. There's nothing wrong with you. It's a cultural crisis. It's a poorly designed idea to deal with trauma by raising a trauma-illiterate culture. So you're not free in your body. If you have no unresolved trauma and you have no active coping mechanisms to deal with the unresolved trauma, you can move through every muscle of your body. You can breathe into every muscle, you can move, you can explore every muscle of your body equally. Now, a tremendous amount of dis-ease in our body comes from these coping mechanisms. Constant tension so we don't feel certain things there, or a feeling comes up and we quickly store it in a muscle of the body. Now, yoga is among the techniques that can take you into every space in your body. And if you find there's certain muscles where you just want to cry, okay, there's grief stored there. For me, it's in my calves, for example. Grief, endless grief stored in my calves. Now again, in a trauma-illiterate culture, what the hell is going on? There's nothing going on in my life that's grief. I don't know. I don't like this yoga thing. We need to be literate. And as the topic heats up, off comes the hat. Philip's still wearing his coat and busy doing his bonding and licking. It's important to think about, by the way, that we're a mammalian species. And if you watch how monkeys interact, grooming each other, having sex, playing together, constantly moving their body, that's our closest biological ancestors. And so what Pip-Pip's doing here, licking me, bonding, staying close, is, he has a fit if we leave him alone in the house. Because as pack mammalian species, Philip knows, and our bodies know, that we are safer together. We are safer in trusted community than we are isolated. The body alerts the mammal. You are vulnerable to a predator when you are alone. Now, many women feel this a little bit more than men, and it's more understandable that women move in packs. Gaggles of women, it's like, how do you, connect, etc. And so that's the biology. But we've created a society, more so for men than women, where we've physically isolated ourselves, number one. And then number two, we've elevated isolation as a status symbol. In other words, in the United States, if you have a room in a house, you are considered lower ranking than if you have a house to yourself. So the social ranking system is at odds with the biological ranking system, because your biology, assuming you're not living with sociopaths, your biology, and I would make the distinction, assuming you're not living with human beings in a sociopathic state, human beings having the full range of access to the reptilian brainstem in a sociopathic state to the transcendent. If the human beings you're around are in an empathic state, your biology is going to be a good 50% calmer as a default than if you are living alone. And that will increase as you are older, etc. And so we've got many things wrong with our cultural design. You've got your own place, you've got your own house, status symbol, biological stressor at the same time. So the next thing to look at, and what you want to be doing with this basically is creating a personal trauma map. Can you be the person you want to be regardless of who's around? You go through every person in your life and you track 1 to 10 how much you can be the person you want to be with each of those people. That's the person tracker. The people you can't be yourself with are likely involved or implicated in some way in your traumatic coping mechanism. Next, do you have access to the full range of your body? Now, you can, of course, correlate these. You can say, do I have access to the full range of my body with this person, or do I start breathing shallow with this person? I put on a good show, but I can't breathe until that person is out of my presence. Okay, you mark the person. How much does that affect your physiology? Where is the physical expression? Breath. Okay, it's in breath. And then breath correlates to this. And then if I don't get out, I start getting a headache because I'm breathing. And then if I don't do the headache, I start cringing. Okay, so you look at the ripple effect in the body. So you want to note this as your body map. Where do you store stuff? How does your body help you avoid certain feelings, certain memories? Now, you want to do this with some help if possible. So I just say, work with this map. But since I've never experienced a professional that's helped me through this in any intelligent way, I've had a number of experiences with professionals where I need to take the lead. And the area that this was so dangerous for me was I didn't know enough to know how to take the lead directly and why. I knew enough to take the lead instinctively, but I didn't know why. And so when the professionals fought me, in this case, the Human Awareness Institute facilitators, when they fought me and started shoving me into traumatic terrain, I didn't have the language. And they wouldn't listen to just direct requests. And so, they were shoving me deeper into trauma. And, I knew it was killing me. I just didn't know how to respond. And so this is kind of a map to give you and your conscious mind, because the biggest killer in trauma is helplessness and suspended helplessness. You've got to get out of that fast. So you want to create a map so that you can navigate, and you need to understand this terrain. It's unkind, by the way, to wait until you're in full-blown trauma to try and sort this out. It's incredibly unkind. It's kind of like waiting till you're hurtling down the highway at 75 miles per hour to learn to drive. It's a disaster. You want to do this kindly, spend 1 to 3 hours a day until this is mastered. And then you're ready. You've got what you need to encounter, more of the shit that's going to get thrown at you. So what is your inner age around this issue or this person? So at any given point where you're feeling this unable to be yourself, you want to track the inner age. So it's an intersect point. And the way to understand the inner age intersect point is think of a tree. Pine tree, a redwood tree, starts out 1 year old. Then the next year, there's a ring. If you cut a 2-year-old tree, you'll see a little ring that contains the data of the 1-year-old. But now it's bigger. It's also 2 years old. And now it's bigger. It's 3 years old. Now it's bigger. It's 4 years old. Now, the way trees are commonly counted, a little sociopathically, admittedly, you cut the tree down and you count the rings. And, okay, this tree is X years old. Now, psychologically, we have the memory biologically and mentally, emotionally of every moment in our past. We have the memory, which means we can access the mental, emotional, physical state for every event in our past. And when we're dealing with unresolved trauma, a trigger point is pulling us into a past moment. So let's say at 2 years old, you made a decision to defend yourself against some violation or another, and you get whacked. And okay, you learn that defending yourself is a terrible idea because everyone around you is much bigger than you, and they're going to punish you for defending yourselves. So you learn, okay, let's cooperate with the abuse, let's freeze. Maybe we won't die. This is what deer do when a lion takes down a gazelle or whatever. They'll instantly go limp. And sometimes that's an intelligent response. You think the deer is going to win a lion? No. You think the 2-year-old is going to win with dad? Forget it. Or mom? Forget it. Or with a drunken baby? Forget it. So you go limp. And after about 20 minutes, if you're able to shake, you can get off. And if you haven't fought and the lion thinks you're dead, sometimes you get to run off. Because it's that fight that often triggers the most adrenaline. And sometimes, a lion will chase just because there's energy, just like a bully. You show a little bit of spine, they can't wait to, but you just collapse to the floor. Oh, well, it's not worth their effort, But you show a little spine, they got to compete and dominate you. You're a little kid, you're in playground, you got 3 fucking bullies all lining up. It's like, who's going to win that one? If that doesn't release chemically in the body, and you have the scent of new mown hay, the smell of bubble gum that was in your mouth at that time, you see a person who's bullying and looking with that eye. It's a certain eye. I'm looking for someone to hurt and make small. You smell the smell, you see that in the eye. Well, you're an adult. You're shopping. They're not going to attack you in Safeway unless they want to go to jail. Your body doesn't know it because you didn't sort out the issue. You just escaped, and everyone around you abandoned the issue. This is what we do in a trauma-illiterate, abuse denial, shadow denial culture. Abuse happens that decimates the psyche of a 6-year-old boy. Everyone pretends it didn't happen. Of course it happened. That life just took a pivotal change. The health data, the economic data, the self-esteem data of that boy just changed for the next 5 decades. And everyone pretends nothing happened. You can't deal with it in a culture of denial. So it's still there. Well, how do you know where you're going in a culture this ignorant? You follow it back to the inner age. How old do I feel inside? When that person looked at me, when that person did that to me, how old do I feel inside? You go back to that age. Now, if you're protecting the actual memory, you'll just get an echo of the feeling and the age, and you've got some work to do, preferably with EMDR, family constellation therapy. If you've got a good therapist, you've got to be very careful in this cult that your therapist doesn't attack you for taking them into the terrain that they haven't dealt with. I've watched the faces of my therapists for 20 years. And I've learned, where they get hard. Don't you take me in there. I've learned where they feel expansive. It's usually when you make them look good, You make them look, yes, that's me, loving everyone, the great therapist. Watch when they get scared. I don't know what to do. I hope Dane doesn't ask me about this. I don't know. And when it's not sorted out and there's still parts of you that are young projecting parent, it's very difficult to break out of these cycles. Because you may be 5 years old as a therapeutic patient, and it's the same dynamic. The therapist is scared of the patient. The father is scared of what a 5-year-old will say to the mother. Don't tell your mother this. A child can't deal with that. And we are foisting our therapeutic patients, our children, on emotionally illiterate, incompetent grown-ups who, from a professional point of view, apparently it's not okay to just say, I'm scared, I haven't done my own work, it's not your fault, and I don't really know how to handle this, so I'm not going to charge you, and I'll try and look into it. But that seems to be what's going on here, and you should not be carrying my weight in addition to your parents' weight. And that's a risk here. So I've never once had a therapist recuse themselves from any of the terrains that they're clearly, as trapped as I am. And some of it is a shadow thing. Some therapists can't deal with their hostility. You're completely emotionally dissociative and ignorant if you don't think you have the capacity to be hostile, and if you don't think you've ever felt that feeling, and if you don't think it can be activated in certain situations. It just means you don't know what you're doing. But, the spiritual critic of the New Age, you try and get one of those Reiki masters or whatever to acknowledge that there's some part of them getting engaged, they just want to pound the shit out of you. You see, it's a healthy, integrated person can say, hold on here. My job is to hold a safe space for you. We're going into terrain that's activating parts of me that are not the healer. They're the coping mechanism. Hold on here. Let me get a hold of myself and see if I have the presence of mind to do my job with you, or if I need to slow this down or even end the relationship so that you get the help from someone who cares more about you than blocking off their own memories. So this is inner age work. How old are you? Now, if you watch anyone in your life, being in a country of regressed people, you will see scared 3-year-old. You'll see scared this. I had a date once. And she said, I can't think. And thank goodness she could actually talk. She said, I can't think. I need to take a shower. And I looked in the bathroom after 20 minutes, and she's huddled on the floor of the shower. And her technique is to stay huddled, like a 5-year-old. And have water go over until the energy passes. Somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour, she's able to stand up and be an adult again. Well, nobody teaches you this. I mean, what are you going to do when you find a 5-year-old in your shower? What's your emotionally illiterate spouse going to do when they find you curled up in a ball and weeping? You see, it's incredibly ignorant and barbaric to raise an entire country of people who don't know the most basic things about their own body, their own hearts, their own minds. For you to be clear is for you to be able to go physically into all the different shapes and positions, and emotionally into all of your ages, and to flow. The flow is the sign that it's healthy. You should be flowing through every emotion and every body posture and every time zone. And you should be going through grief, through terror, through fear, through anger, through hatred, through rage, through bitterness, through disgust, to love, to joy, to excitement, to beauty, to anticipation, enthusiasm, amazement. You should be going through it all. The body and the heart and the mind are scientific instruments. They reflect what's going on outside. And if you haven't found something that elicits hate in you, from what you've seen as an adult, you're not ready to even deal with this. You're in so much denial. There are things out there that elicit the temperature reading called hate. There are things out there that elicit the temperature reading called joy. And this is where we go right into the New Age coping mechanism of let's go into the light without going into the ground. Now, these people fall over with chronic fatigue. They fall over with illness. They fall over in frozen dread. They run away from things constantly for the simple reason that every skyscraper that stands an earthquake spends the first 1 to 2 years going down. If you've spent time on a construction site of any major building, nothing happens. For years sometimes. Because you ground by going down. The first step, the most sacred element, is the soil, is the dark, mucky place that's inside each one of us. And you don't have to go down. You can just climb up. Feels great initially until you start wobbling and falling over and running and all that. And you can't anchor. You've got to go down before you go up. And what's down there? Constricting emotion. Shadow truths, shadow agendas. Everything you stuck below this line is down there. If you're not working in partnership with what's down there, forget it for being a safe person to go up there. Now, we're a culture that worships the flower and thinks dirt is icky. That's a clue, by the way, that you're dealing with an ignorant culture. Gardeners, thankfully, understand the biology that you don't fuss with the flower at all. You don't have to do anything with the flower. The flower blossoms if the soil is good. If the roots are good and the soil is good, the flower takes care of itself. But we boycott attention on the root and the soil within our own psyche. We just want to adore and fuss with the flower, which usually, if anything, damages something that fragile. You fuss with the soil. You get the watering, the drainage. It's all below the surface. The plant will do the rest. So, you want to be able to navigate above and below, positive and negative, the full range of emotions, the full range of inner ages, the full range of your biology. And when you can move through this, now let's make a very clear distinction here. Talking about this is completely different from doing it. I'm getting a left eye headache and my left neck. There's some grief. It's probably the sorrow of having spent $150,000 and not had a single adult sit down and explain this to me. I kept trying to pull it. There's so many therapists I've tried to coach. Could you try this? Well, why aren't you doing this? Have you nothing about this? I shared this point, this. That's not meaning anything to you? It's this trauma blind spot. I kept pointing at bits of trauma, expecting someone to know what the fuck was going on. And their response is, interesting. I'll see you next week. In other words, you can waste your time telling me more symptoms and I'm not going to diagnose. I'm not going to do my job. I'll just sit here and pretend that that's fine because I don't know any better. Well, I knew enough to know that it was off, but, we need help. We need lots of help before we become trauma and emotionally and physically literate. And the most dangerous thing is when the people we go to for help don't know what to do and don't know that they don't know what to do, or if they do, they're scared of telling us because we won't hire them. So it's that's why I'm making this video. Okay, so the grief, let's go with this tension. I'm going to take a pause here and follow a little bit of my own medicine. The next thing to look at is, are you aware of a set, or do you act out a set of oppressive rules that you need to follow in order to feel safe and accepted, that you will not be traumatized in a given environment? And this can mean a couple of different things. The first thing to understand is that no one freely chooses a set of oppressive rules. Why would you? Now, I've lived under a set of oppressive rules most of my life, terrified of being punished, terrified of being, exposed, punished, judged, rejected, absolutely terrifying. Because much of my life I've been 5 years old. And rejection as a 5-year-old could mean death. Rejection as an adult just means you need to find someone more compatible. Now, you're in this lock, and you can follow it back to an inner age if you start to get very anxious or self-critical if you are not doing things perfectly. So it's basically the phenomena we're dealing with is trauma as a child that is unbearable. The inability of a child to accept that their parents were unbearable and incompetent, because that is in and of itself a terrifying realization for a 5-year-old. And so to sidestep that trauma, you have the coping mechanism. And the 5-year-old comes up with a little plan on their own. And it says basically that all this stupidity out there, I don't know, there must be a good reason for that, because I can't admit that my parents are dumb. So, I'm a bad person. That's why this is happening to me. And so, of course, my parents have to beat me and do this and that. But if I can be perfect, that will fix it. Then I will not be abused. And so the child then starts to take responsibility for the abuser's incompetence, number one. Number two, has hope in the possibility of redemption and safety that is positioned inside their domain of control, and can now self-obsess on being perfect in the idea that if and when they finally succeed, they will be loved. The only thing is, it doesn't work. It works to some extent because the abuser will acknowledge to some degree, with appreciation, that you're not focusing on them and their abuse. Most abusers don't like to say, "Hey kid, I'm an abusive parent. I don't know what I'm doing. It's not your fault. I'm going to continue abusing you because I don't know what I'm doing. And unfortunately, you're stuck with me. And and I don't even have time to discuss this anymore. I'm that incompetent in running my life that, you know, I've got crisis after crisis that, you know, and I don't know how to solve that. I mean, let's hope we stay alive with my level of incompetence. Well, thanks, Dad. Well, what do I do about that? Well, nothing, kid. You're screwed, but just live and learn. I'm an idiot. Maybe you can grow up to be someone intelligent. Most parents are not going to say that because it makes them feel bad. So they're going to, you know, with innuendo, with looks, with body language and stuff, going to pass this all off onto the child and into the core message that boils down to, you've ruined my life. It's all your fault, and you're a bad kid. Okay, so what this does is it allows the incompetence of the culture, which has been dumped onto the incompetence of the parent, to be passed off on the child, so the child doesn't, you know, can basically own the entire scapegoated shadow of the entire cultural system. The least capable of dealing with it, the one most blamed for it. It's you know, as sick as it gets. So what are you going to do if you're a kid? Okay, you're going to try and fix the problem that's been given to you by being perfect. So if you're following all these rules, oh my gosh, you know, I forgot to put sugar in the coffee. I'm going to get it for this. I didn't do this. I'm going to be punished. You are in a traumatic dynamic. Now, the bit that's important to understand as an adult around this is when you don't have a single adult around you as a child who has the guts to tell you the truth, you don't get to break clear of this insanity. The condition of survival is one of secrecy, is one of lies that make the parent look better and feel better. Could be the older brother, could be any abuser that make them look better and feel better, could be the abusive boss. So when you don't get to talk about this to anyone, why? Because there's no adult that cares enough about you as a child to actually be willing to go head on with the cult, with the family system, with your parents, who are going to attack that adult for shifting perspective towards the adult's flaws. Now, we're very good at that in America. Don't you affect, I'm going to raise my kid, I'm going to abuse my kid, however I want. Don't you interfere with my parenting. You know, it's one of the biggest things around. I mean, it's like, gee, Dad, I thought you said I ruined your life. Why? And you couldn't wait to get rid of me and wished I'd never was born and blah, blah, blah. Why are you so upset that the neighbor's actually taking an interest in me? I'm not going to have anyone. It's just like absolutely crazy. It's like, you know, and what the parent is really defending is their coping mechanism for feeling good about being a shitty parent. Every adult instinctively knows, every grown-up instinctively knows, that if they take a stand for that kid, they're going to be a target. I remember a father who came to me. He said, my son is a shit, basically. He's such a shit, he can't do anything, but I want him to build up some self-esteem, you know, and stuff like that. So I know he's a useless kid, but I want you to hire him. And I will pay his wages, because frankly, he's useless. I will pay his wages. But you pretend to pay his wages so he'll feel better about himself. And what the father is inviting me to do is participate in the abuse cycle in which the father's incompetence gets passed on to the kid. And the kid is living, he's forced to live like a shitty kid so that his father can pretend, that all his problems are the kid's problems. Now, I met the kid. The kid's a useless kid. Of course, he's terrified. He's not sure if anyone can, if he can tell the truth. Because every time he's told the truth, he's been hit. And the only lie that's accepted and pampered a great deal is the lie that he's a shitty kid and useless and incompetent. So the first thing I did is, and I wasn't familiar enough to understand what I was dealing with. But the first thing I said to the dad is, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie to your kid, number one. Number two, I'm not going to take your money. And number three, I don't think your kid is so shitty. So I've just broken the contract right there. You see? Where does that lead? Back to Dad's desire to murder his own child, to protect his own self-image. End up in a mental institution? No problem. End up dead? No problem. Spend the rest of his life feeling like an absolute shit? No problem. Tell the truth about Dad's incompetence? There's going to be hell to pay. So the first thing I notice is the dad won't pay his bill. Then he gets, because I'm doing work for the dad. That's how I met the dad. He's obsessing. The dad, and I realize, oh, this client is out to get me because I actually cared about his kid. He's one of two clients in my entire history who hasn't paid his bill. You get punished like hell by the abuser when you take a stand for the person they're abusing. And everyone knows this on an instinctive level in our cult. So when you say something awkward about the parent's stupidity, abuse, incompetence, don't talk to your parents like that. You shouldn't be telling me this stuff. Go away from me and don't involve you. Don't involve me in you liberating yourself and knowing what's going on. I don't want to be attacked by your parents. I'm terrified of your parents, and I'm a grown-up. You be the victim. Because we could give a shit about you. We don't want to be met with a baseball bat. We don't want to be this and that with your parents. We don't want them glaring at us. We don't want to wonder what business deals they'll undermine. We don't want any part of it. And we don't. As long as the parent pays their taxes, the government is quite happy for sociopathic, shame-ridden sexual abusers to raise children. Don't ask, don't tell. Just pay your taxes, okay? We'll keep out of your hair. As long as the abuse doesn't show up in school directly, kid shows up with a black eye, this, that, the other. Particularly in a private school, do we really want our client withdrawing the funds? Isn't that partly why they're paying us, to make them look good? And so there's all this dynamic here. So the set of oppressive rules you must follow to be accepted in a situation is how old you feel again and how fearful you are as you're trying to fit into the social group. Now, what this is telling you is that you're not an adult. You are an abused child with unresolved trauma, projecting the abuser who may or may not be there. Meaning, if you look around for who's going to be the new abuser, they'll show up in this culture. People will start bossing you around, do this, do that, do this, do that. And they'll pick up the abuse contract on the other side. I'll take care of your kid in the end, is the lie. So you've got that dynamic. So there could actually be a new abuser that's been on the other side of the contract. They're the bully in their family system, and you're the one trying to be perfect. And so you pair up. It's symmetrical. And now you're with your new bully. And you don't wait and you don't enter a relationship with someone who isn't going to be your bully. And you actively solicit the bully in them. You do this by projecting terror. Someone says, hey, how can I help you? You look down. And the message and the vibe you're sending is, don't hit me, don't hit me, don't hit me. And the response is, how does that relate to me saying, how can I help you? Oh, don't hit me, don't hit me, don't. That's the vibe you're putting out, right? It's like, don't hit you. Who said anything about hitting? And if the person in the abuse contract keeps treating you like the abuser, by ignoring everything that you do that's healthy and amplifying and overreacting to everything that is unhealthy, you will find yourself trying to empathize with them and discovering your own inner abuser to try and make sense of what the person is seeing in you, because the only person they can see within the framework of the regressed frozen trauma is a new abuser. Well, we're trying to see if you're in that role. And you're in that role if you're trying to be perfectionistic. And to the degree that you're trying to be perfectionistic is to the degree that you're in that role. So follow the perfectionism back to the age at which it originated. See if you can work with the memory there. Ideally with a competent trauma therapist who takes the time to listen to this video. Why? Well, frankly, I have not met among 30 practitioners anyone who led me competently into this terrain. So if that's a 1 in 30 odds, do you really want to pay thousands of dollars to someone who may or may not know what they're doing? This is such a virgin field, by the way. We are so ignorant of our own ignorance in this domain as a culture that anyone who thinks they know it doesn't. I don't know it. I'm just sharing the 10% of this domain that I know in a way that makes sense to me at this present, at this present time. You need help with this, is what I'm saying. Now, a deity is a great source because it's not personal. It doesn't fill you with their shit. You may project your shit onto the deity, but if you can create a pretty clear channel with higher conscious energy, whatever you want to name that, and you're not playing the perfectionistic stuff there. I mean, I had the perfectionistic stuff dumped on me on the Christian level as well. Examples of God testing parents by whether or not they cut their children in half and all kinds of sociopathic bullshit. And so, the idea that God would be punished, be terrified of me or I'd be terrified of God and God would kill me if I didn't do the right thing, went right hand in hand with that contract with Dad and with Mom. So if you have a clear relationship with a deity, just imagine the healthiest, kindest, most competent human being you can possibly imagine, times it by 10, and project that on your deity. And that's the kind of deity that says, you poor kid in this fucked up situation, I wish we, get you out of there entirely, but since you're not, let's keep you alive and help you navigate through to where you can reach greater and greater levels of freedom and competency and make your own healthier space. And so, you need love and, appreciation and good vibes and stuff to do that. You've got it coming. And you make mistakes, well, join the rest of this fucked up culture. So, that's, a reasonably healthy parental energy to project. And it's important to understand we're never dealing with the deity. We're dealing with our filtered capacity and our limited capacity to project a shape on an energy that is transpersonal and transhuman. We're never dealing with the reality of source or idealism. We're dealing with our mask. So make it the best mask you can possibly make it, and understand that humans have created their gods and named them, and their goddesses and named them, to represent the archetypal energies that they see in themselves, taken to idealistic levels, that the actual source, the actual other, is always transcendent of whatever notion. But we need to have, I mean, you can't, that's so abstract. You've got to create a deity that is who you want to become. And then that becomes the filter through which you, if you're willing, will allow transcendent energy to come and lift you and touch you and help you transcend the terrified, traumatic child that's afraid of being punished, by understanding that there is actually a template out there for being welcomed as a spiritual adult. But you don't get there by hiding and lying for your abuser, or looking away to make everyone more comfortable. You see the limitations of this species and of this culture and of this country and of the people around you. Okay, this person would murder me rather than own their shitty behavior around this. This person would steal my money rather than do this. This person would, yeah, and that's limitations of human behavior. It's not what I deserve. It's not what is wished for me in an optimal template of energy. It's just what's happening at this current level of evolution. So if you have a set of oppressive rules you have to be accepted in a situation, then and you're choosing to be part of that, it tells you you're in a certain degree of trauma in present or past. I mean, it may be an incredibly oppressive boss situation. There's all kinds of political correctness that's going on in our culture right now that basically, stops people from expressing this part of that part of themselves. It's not acceptable. Well, that's one of the symptoms of dysfunction. When you produce something as a culture, meaning every single one of us is a product of the culture. So when it's like if a gardener plants daisies, and then as the daisies are beginning to open up and blossom, says, I hate white, don't bring that to the table, don't do this. It's like, well, why did you plant daisies? Why didn't you plant roses or whatever it was that you thought was so acceptable? It's like, well, we don't want to deal with that. We don't want to change the underlying cult, the various dogmatic rules, etc., that produce a population like this. We just want to attack the population for being the way that we raise them to be. Well, it's obviously, no gardener would get away with that, but the cultural and spiritual critic are part of the abusive system. And the whole basis of surviving trauma with an abuser in an emotionally and culturally and relationally illiterate framework is to protect the abuser and attack the innocent. So you attack the homeless rather than attack the culture that creates millions of homeless Americans, because that keeps the abuser protected. You attack the poor at the expense of the rich, even in legal systems. It's perfectly well known that if you're rich, you can murder your wife or do this, that, the other, and generally get off. If you're black and poor, go to jail for 20 years for not doing something. So why? Well, it protects the abuser. When you are 2 years old and the only way you survive is by pleasing your abuser, that becomes the fundamental rule that then what pleases the abuser is pretending that that's not the case. So now you have an entire culture of ass lickers who pretend they're not ass lickers so that the abusers can feel better about themselves. And the whole thing colludes to protect the deities in the power structure, regardless of their level of incompetence. I mean, you just look at our president. Lying, cheating on taxes, stealing, not paying, doesn't matter. We've got to protect our president, right? Why? He's an idiot. He's a crook. He's a misogynist. He's a racist. Why the fuck do we need to protect the president? It brings up the trauma. How can we survive without the power structure? Don't go against the power structure that will be dead. You can't do that. Well, we get to see on a large scale what happens on a small scale. It's the same thing with Dad. Trump's not the problem. He's a product of a cultural algorithm that is untouchable because the cultural algorithm is the abuser. And it is protected as the status quo because to face the uncertainty of the unknown that comes with all change is to confront death by encountering the traumatic terrain. And we will do anything as individuals and as a species to avoid dealing with that. Now I'm going to run through these very quickly because we could be here for 10 hours. And your education deserves a good 20 hours. It deserves a good couple of years. Respect yourself enough to do the work. You think trigonometry is so important for daily life? Algebra? French? Geometry? Doctored history? Where exactly are any of these thousands of hours helping your life today? Emotional literacy? Psychology? Human relationships? Freedom within your own body? You've been plagued by this every minute of every day of your entire life. Oh, but it couldn't be worth 10 hours. It's a joke. This is how we collude with stupidity, insanity, and depression. Okay, I want you to notice that the pattern that we're looking for as we're looking for trauma and trauma coping mechanisms is asymmetries. We're looking for aberrations in a symmetrical equation. The body is a complete and integrated system. There is no reason for it to freeze and lock in any position energetically, emotionally, or otherwise, unless it's led to believe through a traumatic experience without the resources to deal with it at the time, that it's not safe for the conscious mind to respond to what's going on there. That's what creates the aberration. So you look for insanity. This is another area, to pay attention to. Areas where it doesn't add up. Now, money and finances and math is great for this. It's one of the reasons that Mueller right now is following the debt in the Trump investigation. If you follow the money carefully all the way into the system and all the way out of the system, you get to know every part of the system, you get to know the value hierarchy within the system, and you get to see how and why each equation is made. Now, what insanity is, particularly as a coping mechanism, and I remember a woman I dated early on who rewarded me for insulting her. Sex, time, laughter, and praise all went up every time I demeaned her. Every time. And this is a little bit odd. Because if you ask the average person, would you like to be insulted? Do you think the world would be a better place if everyone insulted people, if we demeaned you? Do you think you're a piece of shit? Most people would say, well, I kind of feel like a piece of shit, or maybe, but no, I don't think that's the way to go. Okay, so do you think abuse will go down if every time someone abuses you, you reward them abundantly, and every time they don't, you withhold? No, that's not the way psychology works. I would imagine abuse would go up. Okay, do you want abuse to go up? No. Do you reward people for abusing you? Yes. Something wrong with the equation. And that's what we're generally looking at. So within the domain of insanity, we're looking for lies, we're looking for inconsistencies, and we're looking for them as ways to detect a traumatic coping mechanism. Now, we look at things like narcissism, we look at things like sociopathic behavior, we look at things like bullying, we look at things like sadism, masochism. We have a whole explosion within the sexual terrain of BDSM. And we often think that these are actually, just normal behavior, like they're disconnected. But if you follow the thread, why is someone narcissistic? You first of all have to realize that narcissists do not have as much fun as healthy, whole, loving human beings. They don't have as much fun. Now, they may cause everyone else enormous suffering. And you would think that that there's some reason for that. But, if you just measure healthy, whole, loving human beings and the amount of, freedom they experience, how much they, really like themselves and see who they are and can deal with reality, etc., the well-being is up 300%, 400%, 500% higher than the narcissistic state. Now, if you believe that every human being is moving, following perhaps Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, survival, security of survival, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing a sense of aesthetic, of meaning, of purpose, actualizing one's potential, and finally transcending the self and giving back more than we took, giving back something new, essential to who we are, back into the larger ecosphere. And that we are following nature's path with all energy. I mean, look at nature's path. We get food in for our body, and we shit food out for nature's body. Now, we're the ones that call shit a dirty word. We're the ones who call dirt a dirty word. Not nature. Nature calls it food because it is. That's the way a sustainable design works. There is zero waste. And we, like it or not, despite the fictitious overlays of cultural programming, are born from nature. Nature provides the atoms. Nature provides the water. Nature provides the food. We don't exist without this vast ecology of which we are a part. And this ecology is a zero-waste ecology where everything is part of a cycle. Energy comes in, and something more complex and nourishing comes out, and life evolves. Plato would say that on the conscious human equation, we seek beauty, truth, and goodness. Certainly on the natural equation, we seek zero waste. So, if we believe that every human being has a core program to work towards that in the best available method provided, then for someone to end up locked in a narcissistic state, we first diagnose the state, yes, self-absorption. Self-absorption. Well, that correlates with trauma. Because when you're in a sociopathic environment and you're in trauma, you become incredibly self-absorbed to survive. That's what reptilian brain stems do. They do it in crocodiles, they do it in snakes, and they do it in regressed, traumatized human beings who are predominantly dealing with reality through the filter of their reptilian brain induced by enough trauma in childhood that they believe they're surrounded by reptiles. Well, what is the phenomena in which a child born in would be regressed 200 million years to the reptilian brainstem and where the other parts of the brain don't develop in a normal and healthy way? Sustained narcissistic abuse, betrayed and abandoned by everyone around. I mean, imagine what Trump had to go through as a child. If you know anything about Trump Sr., you imagine being his child. Trump Jr. had to watch hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who knew his dad, who knew the snake-like vibe, and never stood up for the child because the snake had the money. And I'm not, we're human beings who have the capacity to de-evolve into a reptilian state to deal with a sociopathic environment. We have the capacity to devolve to a limbic state and just be in raw, unregulated emotion. We have the capacity to be incredibly strategic and calculating with the overdeveloped left lineal Western brain that we cram in. You're being bullied and taught that you need to be a reptile to be survived, and then you're simultaneously being taught lots of knowledge to help you with that survival. It induces incredibly sophisticated sociopathic states in a large percentage of the people. And there's ranges. I have to be a reptile here. I can be a little bit more warm and human over here. Over here, I think I can let my guard down. Oh, no, I can't. I have to be a reptile. Because that's what Maslow's hierarchy of needs level 1 is: survival. What's the rule of survival when you are surrounded by reptiles? Fight, flight, freeze with strategy. Outwit the reptiles. You don't ask the reptiles for help. You don't say, please help me. Because they're reptiles. They're waiting for that. See, when someone says that emotions and asking for help is weak, what they're saying is, I'm a reptile, and that's a point of vulnerability where I can pounce and take everything that they have for very little. The bankruptcies in Detroit where people are picking up people's houses for over 30 years for $10,000, $20,000 for back taxes, $5,000 for a house. Many of the capital companies will call themselves reptilian names. The Predator. We're going to come in and steal everything you've got for $5 grand, and that's what my investors want. Yeah. You present a reptilian persona to people in survival needs, and you induce a reptilian persona. You legalize reptilian behavior in a predatory capitalistic framework that deals with people's survival, and you create violence and crime. Then suddenly you've got all the money you need for the police force to attack its own people, but you don't have any money, apparently, to protect people's houses. That's a reptilian cult. Where the top predator is protected with public money to harm its people. Good business or inducement of a sociopathic state, inducement of trauma, and the de-evolution of a country back to the core need of survival and 200 million years of brainstem programming. What do you want? The soil grows the seeds that you plant and that the soil and the culture will support. You don't like the plant? Change the soil. Change the culture. There is nothing innately evil or good in human beings. You decide if you want a transcendent, healthy, loving and empathic and caring presence who will sacrifice so that what's good in you will grow, or whether you want snakes waiting for the chance to coil and the denigration of an entire country to protect the abuser contract. So that's our general pattern. We're looking for mathematical asymmetries. That's how we know we're dealing with a coping mechanism. Now, we know we're in the domain of trauma because it takes a lot of effort and energy to disintegrate someone. We're born whole. We're born symmetrical. We're not born chauvinistic, misogynistic, capitalistic pigs. We're born whole. Little boys don't feel weak crying. Little girls don't feel worthless. No, that's trained behavior. There are predispositions towards masculine and feminine energy, but whether that's positive or negative, whether that's a masculine energy that protects the inner feminine or a masculine energy that misogynistically rapes the inner feminine and allows itself to be raped, that's cultural. We want different people. Look to the soil. Are you in fight, flight, or freeze? So this is the first metric. And I mean, this is homework. 10, 20 hours of, writing, mapping, drawing, 10, 20 minutes a day, hours a day. This is homework. If you want to claim your right to be a king or a queen, to protect what's good in you and grow, this is homework. You need to map out this terrain, to see it, to own your kingdom, your queendom. Are you in fight, flight, or freeze? Number one, in which areas? Which areas are you? I hope nobody discovers me. Invisibility, freeze, flight. Lies, freeze, flight. Lies usually are running. Silence, freeze. Let's avoid them, or let's lie. You know, it's where are you in what terrain? Fight, flight, freeze. Where are you afraid of being discovered? I can't let anyone know that I don't know what I'm doing here, so I'm going to be extra confident and aggressive. I'm fighting. No problem here. Everything's great. No, don't look there. Everything's great. Thank you. Thank you. Good day. You know, everything possible. Get the fucking attention away from this area. Fight, flight, freeze. Now, there's typically going to be one of these that is forbidden, because this is one of the reasons you're stuck in trauma. Is it running that's forbidden? It means weakness. I'll be the laughing, you know, whatever it is, it's taboo. There's usually one of them, fight, flight, or freeze, that you cannot go into for some reason in the family system, in the cultural system. You're a guy, guys don't run. You're a Marine, running would have killed you, or you know, whatever it is. You've got some area that's very, very, you feel you're going to die, basically, if you go into that terrain. You want to know what that one is. And then you want to map out why that's off limit. When you diagnose the pattern inside, you are simultaneously diagnosing the phenomena that produced the pattern outside. This is why self-awareness is taboo in an abusive framework. You can't truly understand the imprint. It's like a paw. A giant predator comes and scratches you here and leaves a mark. And if the predator is taboo, we don't talk about them. They don't exist. No, that's not predation. No. You can't look at the mark. Because the more you look at the mark, you say, wow, those paws are about 7 inches across. The claws went this. I think we're dealing with a 200-pound beast. Probably with that amount of paws, we're probably looking at a good 3 feet in height. No, we can't look there. When you diagnose the symptoms in the person, you are diagnosing the disease in the system in which the person is a part. They're completely interconnected. These marks don't exist without the tiger that made them. Your depression doesn't exist without a depressing environment. Your toxins in your body don't exist if you're not living in a toxic environment. Duh! We are connected to our environment. Now, of course, DuPont wants us to believe that C8, no problem. The fact that it's showing up in blood all around the world from Teflon, no problem. The fact that it causes birth defects in cows downstream of the factory, no problem. The fact that birth defects and other causes within the surrounding waterways going up exponentially, it's nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us. But they pay vast amounts of money to keep the information secret. So why can't anyone know the information? It's an abuse cycle. In this case, let's protect capital at the expense of human beings. It makes sense if you deify capital, because we don't call ourselves humanists. We don't call ourselves healthists. We don't call ourselves beautiful human beingsists. We call ourselves capitalists. And the primary responsibility of capitalists, as it's been defined in the last 40 years, is to protect the capital of the investors. We've accepted this. 10,000 people need to die. Children need to spend 30 years of their life with deformed noses and this and that. No problem. Did you protect the capital? Did this little bit of paper grow into another bit of paper or 2 bits of paper. Screw the kid, protect the capital. Well, you just have to go down to the little seeds of truths within our different, ethical frameworks. The danger of the golden calf. The love of money, not money, the love of money, the root of all evil. Well, certainly, if people create bits of paper, and then other people say, well, those bits of paper are more valuable than the people who created them, that's a bad mathematical equation, by the way. If a goose lays a golden egg, and then you say the egg is more valuable than the goose, that was what that whole story is about, to tell us how dumb that is. It doesn't work. Because the egg doesn't exist without the goose, because the money doesn't exist without the people. The idea that what someone creates is more valuable than the person who created it is flawed math, and that's what we're looking for when we're looking for insanity and symptoms of trauma. That equation will lead to systemic abuse and growing trauma, which in turn will decrease the net wealth within the population base. Oh, it may concentrate, because you have many ways of creating wealth. You can create a framework where the entire country becomes 20% poorer, but at the same time, 10 people become richer. Not richer than all the wealth lost by half the population, but can 10 people make an extra billion while 200 million people lose $1 trillion? Sure. Now, the net capital in the country is less, but a few people have more. That's creating a policy that decreases wealth while redistributing it simultaneously so that a few people have more, so that there is actually less net wealth within a region, but a few people have more. Well, that's a formula where everyone, including the people with bits of paper, lose. Because you're much wealthier if you can drive around safely and have happy, healthy people who are not infecting your kids because they don't have health insurance. Then if you've got, what, another $1 billion mansion? The math doesn't add up. Here's your symptoms of insanity. Because in addictive paradigms, addiction, which money is a big addiction, busyness is another addiction. You could be good at your job and addicted to being busy and end up with tons of money, or you could be addicted to the power rush and end up... Addiction, irrational, repetitive behavior that is out of sync with everything else, is a traumatic coping mechanism. So how addicted are you? Map out your addictions. I've been addicted to 20% of something my whole life. Now, I got to choose what it was, so I'll be addicted to goals. I've achieved thousands of goals. I'll be addicted to therapy, $150K in therapy. If you have to be addicted to something, you might as well pick something that presumably is taking you in a better direction, but also understand that addiction is always a symptom of an underlying trauma that one lacks the resources and skill to unpack and integrate the energy of the trauma back into the system. Now, also be aware, particularly with the epic plague of chronic fatigue, that it takes more and more energy to protect the lie, and then protect the lie that you're not lying, and then protect the lie that you're not lying, that you're not lying, and then protect the lie that you're not lying, that you're not lying, that you're not lying, because the truth is always trying to emerge through the concrete pavement and grow. But the split self is constantly saying, we can't afford to do that. We're going to die. As soon as that truth comes out, we're going to die. Pile on more and more stuff. You just bury. Spend more and more energy burying what's essential and good within the self to protect what's rotten in the abuser that could kill you. And this is one of the reasons you have so much poverty, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, and spiritually in abusive cultures. You just have to spend constant energy, more and more energy on alarms, more and more energy on insurance, more and more energy on policing, more and more energy, 26 times more money than the next military competitor. Sound like an intelligent way to spend money in the United States? Oh, we're 20 times bigger than the next military. It's not enough. It's not enough. 22. No, still not enough. 23 times bigger. 23 to 1. No. Got to do it. When you're in an addictive framework, you're dealing with an underlying irrational trauma. Of what? Helplessness. It's taboo. Try being an American man and say, I'm stunned, I'm completely helpless, I'm overwhelmed, and I need help. And just watch what happens. The room empties. No one wants to be there with that persona. And they will do whatever it takes. The young boys raped by the Catholic male priests often became bodybuilders. No one's going to take me again. Fuckers. Manic. My big muscles, I'm not helpless. With all of that, 80 years later, it doesn't give them the stamina and the strength to face the terror of that 5-year-old boy. And you think the women of this country are going to stand by the weeping 50-year-old men dealing with 5-year-old grief in a cult that would cover them up in a split second to protect the reputation of an abusive church? No. You'll find these women complaining that there aren't any real men, rather than behaving like real women. They're not adults. So the cycle continues. This is giving you a window to do your part. And it's very, very difficult, by the way, to do something and to interrupt a cycle and say, no, I'm not going to just be used as fodder for this machine, and what comes out the other end is not going to be what goes in. It's hard work to tear apart a machine like this that everyone is invested in keeping secret. That's why I'm talking about it. You're not alone here. You want to find the part of the fight, flight, freeze mechanism that you can't enter. You want to understand why you can't enter it. And you need to start breaking that taboo. One of the things you'll notice is fight. That's my taboo. Anger, aggression, precision, truth-telling, confrontation, not allowed. in my system if I wanted to live. And yet, with no ability to fight, I found myself being buried and buried and buried and buried as I withdrew from other people who had those, they had maybe it wasn't allowed for them to run, maybe they weren't allowed to freeze, but they could fight. If I can't fight, I have to withdraw. It doesn't matter the terms. It doesn't matter that that's the only option I have if I don't want to face the fear of death. And the fear of death produces this trauma, and when you're trauma illiterate, you feel like you're going crazy. Why do I feel like I'm going to die? It's a pivotal point in the process to enter the domain that is taboo in your family system, or taboo for your role in the family system. For example, the scapegoat doesn't fight.